So Thomas Kingsley Brown has been researching Ibogaine treatment for substance dependence since 2009, when he began conducting interviews with patients at a treatment center in Playas de Tijuana, Mexico, and collected data for the purpose of studying quality of life for those patients. In 2010, he began working with MAPS, Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies, on a Mexico-based observational study of the long-term outcomes for people receiving Ibogaine-assisted treatment for opioid independence. That study is now complete, and the first research article on the study has been published in the American Journal of Drug and Alcohol Abuse this year. In 2013, he published a review article on Ibogaine treatment in Current Drug Abuse Reviews. Thomas is on the staff of the University of California, San Diego, as the coordinator of the McNair Scholars Program, which prepares first-generation low-income undergraduate students and those from underrepresented ethnic groups for doctoral programs in all fields of study. His own academic training is in chemistry from the University of Pittsburgh and Caltech, neuroscience and anthropology. So welcome, Dr. Kingsley Brown.
All right, let's see. All right, thanks for being here. And I want to first thank MAPS for funding the study and also all of the study participants for being in it, because we couldn't have done the research without them and their consent. So today I'm going to talk about two things. One is the study that was completed and we published earlier this year, and also a study that is in the planning stages right now. That is going to be an update on an article that was published in 2008 called the Ibogaine Medical Subculture. So I just want to start with a little bit of a historical overview, and most of you probably know most of this or all of it, but just to put this into context, both the research study that's been completed and the updated version of the Medical Ibogaine Subculture article. So all of you probably know the story of Howard Lotsoff's serendipitous discovery of the ability of Ibogaine to quell the withdrawal symptoms and cravings from heroin usage in New York City in 1962. Now, at that time, Ibogaine was still legal in the US, but then it became illegal in 1967 and was put on Schedule I as a substance that had no medicinal value and was subject to abuse. So the change in legal status made it impossible to do research in the US or to possess Ibogaine legally in the US. And a few European countries followed suit there. Did I lose? Yeah, there we go. Okay, so in the late 1980s and early 90s, there were a few dozen different animal preclinical studies done to show that Ibogaine and 18-MC were effective in reducing withdrawal symptoms in mice and other species, and also in reducing the cravings for and self-administration for morphine and other opioids. We still didn't have research with humans, though, and also, but in the late 1980s, there was activism in both the Netherlands and the US pushing for the availability for Ibogaine treatment and also for research into its efficacy with humans. So, yeah. All right. So as you know, Howard Lotsoff, the discoverer of this medicine, in 1962, there's a picture of him. It looks like it's in the Netherlands, but I'm not sure. This picture is from Ken Alper, so a couple of the other slides are also from him, so thanks to Ken for that. Next, please. All right, so to continue with the historical overview, in 1989, Ibogaine treatment started in the Netherlands, and also in New York City, there were also some treatments begun, and these were really with support from addict self-help groups, what they were known as at the time as addict self-help groups. And then in the early 1990s, Ken Alper and Howard Lotsoff presented some data to NIDA, and there were some case studies showing that withdrawal symptoms were resolved, and NIDA actually funded a project into that included human clinical trials. And those plans were dropped, though, by the mid-90s, and also research in the Netherlands, the plans for that were also dropped by the mid-90s. However, with the interest in this and the activist groups that were pushing for this treatment, people started doing treatments in the Netherlands. There was increasing availability of the treatments in the Netherlands and in the US, and also in other settings around the world, in these alternative settings. Thank you. Next. Here's another shot that was from Ken. This is, I think Dana said that this is from 1991, and Rotterdam, that's Hertha Franken, along with Norma and Howard Lotzoff, outside the Hertha's apartment in the Netherlands. Excuse me. Just breathe for a moment. All right. Next, please. All right. So, up to this point, there were animal studies showing the efficacy of Ibogaine, but there were no human clinical trials, and there were a few retrospective studies and case studies showing that Ibogaine could reduce withdrawal symptoms, but there wasn't any systematic research, and there were no prospective studies showing that Ibogaine was effective. However, you had people who were seeking treatment, and you had anecdotal case studies of people saying that they were freed from their addiction, at least on the short term. So there was a need for these research studies, which wasn't really met until recently. Next, please. All right. Okay, so here comes the study that we did. I started this study in 2010 with support from MAPS in the US with 2 clinics in Baja California, Mexico. And we actually started at Claire's clinic at Pangea Biomedics in Playas de Tijuana. And then we moved on to Jeff Israel's clinic in Rosarito. So there's another study that was done in New Zealand, which you might have caught Jeff Noller's talk yesterday. That was the same study, virtually the same study, but in New Zealand. We enrolled 30 individuals in this study who were seeking treatment for opioid use disorder, as defined by DSM-4. We also used, so our main measures were the subjective opioid withdrawal scale, or SOWS, which we would administer right before treatment and right after treatment, within a few days after treatment, to show whether or not their opioid their withdrawal symptoms were increasing or decreasing. And then the other main score we were using was called the Addiction Severity Index. And as I'll show you, there were 7 sub-scores within the ASI. We call them ASI composite scores, so each of them has questions relating to that area of severity, and you produce a score, a numerical score for each of them. The higher the number, the more severe the case is. And so what we did was administer this before treatment and then monthly after treatment for 12 months. And we aggregated the data for months 3, 6, 9, and 12 to produce scores for each of those. So in the paper, we talked about the SOWS and the ASI, the paper that came out earlier this year, but we did not discuss 2 of the measures that we're using, which were the States of Consciousness Questionnaire, which I'll discuss in a little bit, and also the Back Depression Inventory, or BDI. Next, please. All right. So here are our results with the SOWS, so the Subjective Opioid Withdrawal Scale. On the left side here, you see the pre-treatment scores. And this is a scale that ranges from 0 up to 64. There are 16 items. And the person who's doing the survey ranks him or herself on the severity of withdrawal symptoms in these 16 different areas. So you have 0 to 4 in each of 16 areas. Therefore, 64 is the maximum score. And this actually shows you the scores for each person in the study. And you see the pre and post scores for each person. Now, what's interesting here, there are 2 really interesting things here. One is that the SOWS scores actually decreased significantly with the p-value of 0.001 from pre-treatment to post-treatment at a time when you expect the withdrawal symptoms would actually be getting worse. The other thing is here that and this is, I think, of particular importance to people who are doing these treatments, who are providing the treatments. You see 3 people who had actually had increasing scores. So that's interesting in itself, but still, as a population, the overall scores were decreased quite dramatically. Next, please. Okay, so the ASI, which actually was our main measure, we wanted to see if the drug use severity would decrease from pre-treatment to post-treatment. And as I mentioned, the ASI has 7 different areas. Don't know if they're listed here. They will be listed in the subsequent slide. But there's drug use severity, which was, of course, the one we were most interested in a way, because we wanted to see if it would help people stop using the opioids. But each of these sections has both objective type scores where you might be asked, how many days out of the past 30 have you used opioids? Or how many days out of the past 30 have you smoked cannabis? And also some subjective scores, and that would be things like, in the past 30 days, how troubled or bothered have you been by your drug use? Or how important to you is to get treatment right now? So, as I said, we administered the ASI before treatment and then after treatment for 12 months. And we did 2 comparisons statistically. One was to look at the values before treatment and to compare those with the 1-month post-treatment values. And the reason that we did that was to see, is there a treatment effect at 1 month? So if we see whether or not the scores increase or decrease significantly, and that shows us if there's a treatment effect at 1 month. The second analysis we did was to look at the 1-month scores and compare those to later time points. And the thinking here is that we wanted to see if any treatment effect seen at 1 month was actually continued or if it dropped off after 1 month. Okay, so let's see. All right. Okay, yeah, that's good for that. Thank you. Next slide. So yeah, our analysis on the treatment effect at 1 month is showing that in several areas there is a treatment effect. What I want you to notice here is, so in this middle column, those are the scores before treatment. And keep in mind that in each of these areas, a higher score means worse severity, means that the problems are worse. So drug use, 0.4, average, plus or minus 0.08. You can see that that's actually the highest score of all of them, so indicating that the drug use severity was the worst for any of the categories. And then this score here on the right is the 1-month score, and statistically we're comparing these two to see if there's a difference in the population scores. So another thing to notice here is that we started out with 30 people, n equals 30 at baseline or pre-treatment. And at 1 month, I was able to only reach 20 people. So right away, you see that 10 people weren't available for follow-up. And because we were submitting this to this scientific journal, we wanted to be as rigorous as possible and make the most conservative assumptions possible so that they would be able to accept our results. So what we did, if we were missing somebody from the study at any point, we assumed that their scores on each of these different scales went back to what we call baseline. So someone might have had a high score on the drug use before treatment, and they weren't available at 1 month. It might be because they were using and didn't want to talk to me, or they were in rehab and they weren't available. That happened as well. But our conservative assumption was that if they weren't available, then they were using, and their scores went back to baseline. Nevertheless, in our analysis, what we showed is that at 1 month, the drug use scores they dropped quite substantially. And we also saw effects in family and social status. And to me, this is actually at least as important as the drug use scores, because what we're showing here is that in the relationships that matter most to people, that is with their family members and people who matter most in their lives, that those relationships are improving. And as you see the scores going from 0.24 down to 0.07, and quite significantly, the p-value statistically showing that the 1 month follow-up scores are much lower. despite our conservative assumption there. So the other ones that showed an effect, employment status actually got worse. That's easy to explain on the basis of people taking time off for the treatment and not returning to a job right away. And that effect we showed later on was, after 1 month it tailed off. So legal status was improved. That is, do people feel like they're they're in trouble with the law? Are they doing illegal things? And psychiatric status, you can see we didn't claim this as a significant effect because we were just outside the 0.05 p-value, but it's kind of a borderline. It's right about 0.05 for effect. So we're almost showing an effect there, even though we're making that conservative assumption that I mentioned. All right, so next slide, please. All right, so. What about the medical status? Oh, medical status? Yeah, go back. Medical status, actually, you can see the number actually increased, but it wasn't significantly increased. The p-value was higher than 0.05. I don't recall what that p-value was, but as a whole, the scores didn't change significantly. So, okay, so, all right, so the second comparison we did, the second series of comparisons, was to take those 1 month scores. And these scores are actually the same as what you see in the previous slide. We then compared those to later time points using something called a non-inferiority test. And essentially what this is, if you have a significant value, that is, if the p-value is less than 0.05, what that means is that the scores didn't get any worse. So they statistically didn't get any worse than they were at 1 month. So with drug use, you can see that these scores had declined quite a lot at 1 month compared to pre-treatment. But none of the following ones were significant compared to 1 month. And what this means is that we're showing a treatment effect at 1 month. It's not as strong in the following months. It actually tails off a little bit. However, in the other analysis we did was to look at these different time points compared to the baseline scores. And for every one of those follow-up points, the drug use severity is actually significantly lower than pre-treatment. So ultimately what we're showing is drug use scores improved dramatically at 1 month. They were improved at later time points, but not as much as they were at 1 month. Family and social status, you can see with the significant comparisons here that the treatment effect held through at least 9 months. It was still lower here. The number is still lower here than baseline, but statistically, because we had people dropping out of the study as we progressed through there, we didn't get the significance there. So, but we do show through 9 months that those scores pretty much held even. And employment status, the scores, so that 1 month they were the worst they were going to get, and they actually decreased a bit. But this is showing that they're not worse than they were. Actually, they're better than they were statistically. And legal status, we're showing that through the entire 12 months, the scores pretty much stayed where they were at 1 month. Psychiatric status, similarly, we're showing that they pretty much held even for the first 6 months. And as you can recall, at 1 month we had about a 0.05 p-value, so they were on the verge of being significant there. All right, next slide, please. All right, so another way of looking at this data is to look at how many days out of the past 30 days someone who's been using opioids. And this is part of the ASI interview anyway. So we have this data from the ASI. But if we simply look at how many days out of the past 30 somebody's using opioid substances, before treatment, you can see all the N values of how many people were still in the study at that point. Average days not using out of 30 was 1.0. So that means that 29 days out of 30 they were using opioids. All right. And looking at the second line from the top, among subjects available for follow-up, so that's just the 20 people, 19, 14, 17, 14. You see the averages there. At 1 month, they're using only a few days a month on average. And that drops. They actually increase their usage on average as the time continues through 12 months. But they're still using a lot less frequently than they were at pretreatment. And then if you take this middle line here is if you use the pretreatment values, you assume that they've gone back to what they were doing before their treatment. For the people who weren't available at follow-up, you can still see that the number's lower. And we're not doing any statistical comparison here, but just looking at averages, you can see that they're still using less than they were before treatment, even if you assume that everyone who is not available for treatment or for a follow-up is using the same as before treatment. Let's see. And this final one, line here, number of people in the study reporting no opioid use in the previous 30 days. This, to me, is the most impressive one. So I was able to reach 20 people out of the 30. 15 of them reported that they weren't using any opioids in the past 30 days. And you can see, this one, 10 people reported that they hadn't used in the past 30 days. And that's out of 19 people that I reached. So you can see how that goes. Next slide, please. And yet another way of looking at this data, and I wanted to include this slide mostly for the people who are here who are treatment providers. This is it's called a spaghetti plot, and it's showing from 0 before treatment through the 12-month period what the ASI composite scores were for drug use severity. And so you can see on the left side there, the average was 0.4. Most everyone is up there around 0.3 to 0.5. And then 1 month, you have this just substantial drop. This is when, on average, they're using 1 day a month, or a few days a month. And then you can see that it kind of jumps all over the place for some people. But some people, there's a substantial proportion of the people in the study who stayed low. They kept their drug use severity down low. Next slide, please. And we captured this effect statistically. Next slide, please. By showing that out of the 30 people in the study, if you look at 9 months and 12 months, 12 of the people in the study had scores in the ASI composite drug use score that were 75% or more reduced from pre-treatment. So there's this, what we call the good result. 12 people out of 30 actually, their scores dropped down here, and they maintained that low ASI composite drug use score throughout the 12-month period. But there were some people who didn't do as well in terms of their drug use score, and some people actually even went above their pre-treatment values on that, and then came back down. All right, next slide, please. All right, so to summarize this, so the SOWS scores dropped from pre-treatment to post-treatment. At 1 month follow-up, we had 15 people out of the 30 who reported no opioid use during the previous 30 days. ASIC drug use and legal and family and social status scores were improved relative to pre-treatment baseline at all post-treatment time points. So at 1, 3, 6, 9, and 12, they're all significantly lower than at pre-treatment values. And the drug use scores were most improved at 1 month, and sustained from 3 to 12 months at levels that did not quite reach the 1 month level. So you see that after 1 month, the effect isn't quite as strong statistically. All right, next slide, please. Let's see. This is a comparison of standard. I'm going to just hold this slide here for a moment. But in the paper, we compared our results to standard treatment results. And the overall, the upshot is that our values are what we show in the study is very good compared to standard treatment, despite the fact that we had such a low number of people in the study and that we had a lot of drop-off out of the study for people who didn't participate the whole time. And keep in mind, too, that this is not a study funded by a pharmaceutical company. It's not a multi-million-dollar study. I was doing this in my spare time. Basically, I had a full-time job at the university and keeping up with people during the 2 years that I did this research. So the fact that the Ibogaine treatment was producing results that were better than standard treatment, and these are, if you're familiar, the Kochen reviews they're meta-analyses of all the research, all the literature that's out there. So we're beating those. The Ibogaine treatment is actually more effective than standard treatment according to these massive reviews. Okay, so and if we could come back to this later if anyone has questions, but this is an interesting one to point out. I felt badly about the drop-off rate out of the study, that people weren't responding. But if you look at studies of opioid agonist maintenance treatment with Suboxone, buprenorphine, or methadone, you see that after an average of 19.5 weeks, like 4.5 months or so, this is the percentage of people who were retained in the maintenance program. So those people were dropping out, and they were on a maintenance program. All right, next slide, please. Okay. I'm going to go through these slides kind of quickly. I included these thinking that I might have time, but mostly what I'm showing here, when I first started doing interviews at Claire's clinic, I asked people about why they were there, what brought them to seek treatment, what their lives were like, what their experiences were like with the Ibogaine, and then what they felt like after treatment. And we also collected this sort of qualitative data during the MAPS-funded study. Before treatment, people are often suicidal. They sense that the opioids are killing them. Next slide, please. They also reported that they had little motivation to do anything. They didn't feel strong emotions. Next slide, please. And then post-treatment, people are showing that they feel like they're a new person. I have my life back. My personality is back. A common theme is also reconciliation with family members. After maybe years, Simon was somebody in the study. It's a pseudonym, but he reconciled with his parents who he hadn't talked with for years. Okay, and next slide, please. We also there are a lot of people who said during their Ibogaine experiences they saw visions of the future that I think of this as sort of this like Scrooge days of Christmas, future Christmas, or anti-Christmas, where they were seeing themselves in these horrible situations if they continued on their current path. Next slide, please. People also reported what I would consider mystical experiences, out-of-body experiences, images of Christ, understanding that someone has always been watching over me. Next slide. And the reconciliation and forgiveness with people in their lives. Recall that apart from drug use, so after the drug use improvements, the most improved subscore was in the family and social well-being area. And so people were showing with numbers that people's social relationships are improving, but these are also some quotes from people in the study. This is actually one of the most powerful ones. I felt a profound sense of love for my family and their love for me, and an intense, almost piercing agony as I was overwhelmed with the remorse and the waste and loss, feeling empathy with my family, all their hopes for me dashed by my relentless pursuit of drugs. So this is a realization, a feeling that this person had during his Ibogaine treatment. Yeah, next slide, please. All right, so I'm going to probably not try to dwell on this for too long, but one of the other measures we use was called the States of Consciousness Questionnaire, and it's a way of quantifying someone's experience. 100 items, 43 of which are scored on a scale of 0 to 4, I think, from I didn't feel that at all to I felt that more strongly than ever in my life. So a sense of unity or oneness with everything, or a sense that someone was watching over me. Did you feel this or not? And in the scoring, in these different domains of mystical experience, as you can see there's different domains. There's a score that's created based on the score you wrote down on the sheet out of the maximum. So if you average 60% of the maximum score in each of those domains, it was considered a complete mystical experience. Next slide, please. This is a little bit complicated, so I hope I can explain it, but I tried to summarize this well. So as I was saying, there are 7 different domains in this scale, and so it's possible for someone to score 0.6 or higher in 7 different domains, right? Or they could score 0.6 or higher in 0 of the domains. So what this is doing is summarizing for the 28 people who we had the data on. 7 people said, they just didn't have a very powerful experience at all. In none of those domains did their scores reach 0.6 or higher. But we also had people who, had in 6 or 7 domains reported very powerful experiences. So, and it's kind of a bimodal curve in a way, right? You've got people down here who didn't have a very powerful experience, people up here who had very powerful experiences with the Ibogaine. So again, you see this really wide individual variation in what was happening for them. And what I did, which wasn't in the paper, I said, okay, these people had powerful experiences. That's, I think, 11 people. Is that right? So, yeah. I took these. I had these people. I used their scores on the drug subscore, ASIC drug subscore, and I compared them to the subscores that were reported by these people with the less powerful experiences. Next slide, please. So, okay, yeah. So we had 10 people in one group. This is the people who had 6 or 7 categories in which they scored that high. 18 people in the less powerful experience group. And so I did a chi-square or a Fisher's exact test analysis. You see here, drug use, ASIC score at baseline. So this is before treatment. Their averages, you see, are 0.42 for one group, 0.39 for one group. And then this is comparing those two. That means that statistically those are the same. So these groups were, before treatment, their drug use scores were statistically the same. And here it is at 1 month, where we're showing them the highest treatment effect for the ASIC drug use score. And their averages. Now, I should tell you that I assumed, with our conservative assumption, that if we couldn't reach someone at 1 month, that their scores for the drug use went, thank you, their scores for the drug use went back to baseline. So, but doing that with the conservative adjustment, we show that, in fact, the people who had better outcomes also had more powerful experiences, or the people who had more powerful experiences had better outcomes at 1 month. So it's a way of quantifying that the subjective experience actually makes a difference, that what's happening with the Ibogaine makes a difference in their treatment outcomes. All right, next slide, please. And to summarize, we don't really know how Ibogaine is doing what it's doing, but we do see that it's doing something that allows people the opportunity to change. After therapy, many patients become more agreeable to change. Next slide, please. All right. So the study that is in the planning stages right now is a reprise of an article that was written back in 2008 by Ken Alper, my co-author on the recent paper, Howard Lotsoff, and Charles Kaplan. And that was called the Ibogaine Medical Subculture. Next slide. So what they were showing, and this is, they were doing this analysis back in 2005, 2006, and published it in 2008. And when I say Ibogaine treatment outside of Africa, I mean outside of the indigenous, the context, the ceremonial context. So, so this would include, say, treatments in South Africa that were done for opioid use or for addiction treatment. Through early 2001, there were 857 people who had been reported as getting treatment, and through 2006, which was when the study was completed, that number had increased roughly fourfold, and as the authors point out, that's an average yearly growth rate of approximately 30%. So this is a period during which there is a lot more happening, a lot more treatment centers, a lot more treatments occurring. And what they also showed was that people's reasons for getting the treatment primarily was for substance use. 68% of those people were seeking treatment for substance use, and 53% of them were seeking treatment specifically for opioid use. Next slide, please. So yeah, just emphasizing that this is a period during which there's a lot of growth in the availability of treatment. Next slide, please. And this is showing all the treatment centers that were known at the time, and it was an exhaustive study, so they knew what was going on then. 13 different treatment sites, and I also list the United States as having some underground scenes. Next slide, please. A few years ago, in preparation for another conference, I had a conversation with Jonathan Dickinson, head of GITA, and I contacted as many treatment centers as I could, and I found, as you can see, many, and I've got a range in some places because I wasn't able to contact someone at a treatment center, but I heard that there was someone there. I didn't have the resources to be as exhaustive as they were, but this actually shows 39 different treatment centers around the world, and that's actually including some in the US that were underground. But that's threefold more than there were in 2006. Next slide, please. So that's all a big prelude to this project that Ken Alper and I are embarking on. And we're just in the planning stages right now. But the idea is to contact all Ibogaine treatment centers and also to do scour the internet and try to find as many of the underground treatments as we can and try to get an estimate of how many people are buying Ibogaine online and self-administering. But we're going to be contacting you. If you're providing treatment, we're going to be contacting you and asking you about how many people have you treated? What was the purpose of the treatment? What were they seeking treatment for? What methods are you using? What's the treatment setting? And are you collecting outcomes data? This is important too. If possible, what I'd like to do is to get all the outcomes data that people are collecting and put that into some kind of repository. I'd like that to be part of what GITA does eventually, actually. And then the idea is to compile all this data, organize it in some way, and then publish it. Pretty easy, right? To contact all these people. It took them about, I think, 9 months to do the study before in 2006. So this is going to take a lot of work. Next slide, please. So what we're going to do is to create a master list of all the treatment sites. We also want to know what treatment sites have ceased operations between 2006 and now. And you can imagine that there are probably many that have existed. So we're going to really need your help in identifying treatment sites that have existed and finding out as much as we can about those. We also want to estimate the number of underground treatments. And we're going to be very sensitive to concerns about confidentiality. Essentially, we will not publish anything that you don't want us to publish. And overall, what we want to do is to create a snapshot, a picture of what's happening now and what's been happening in the last 11 years or so in Ibogaine treatment. We're going to collect the data using email contacts, telephone, and the idea now is to create an electronic survey that you could fill this out, and then it would immediately populate a spreadsheet so that we can use this data most easily. All right, next slide, please. So, how you can help me, aside from helping me with my German, is to contact me. So I've got my two main email addresses there. Contact me and let me know that you've been a treatment provider, or that you are currently a treatment provider, and I'm going to need a lot of assistance with me. I've got already a few people, including a psychiatrist who's present in the room right now, who has said that she is very excited to help with this project. But if anyone here is interested in helping to collect the data or contact people, I'm very interested in hearing from you. This is going to be a large project. So yeah, and you can help by responding to our contact attempts and by completing any surveys we send out. Let us know about other treatment providers in your region that we might not know about. And this is the most important one, is to send money. Well, it's kind of a joke, but it's also true that we have no funding for this project right now. We're going to be submitting it for IRB approval at one institution or another, and we will undoubtedly be trying to get some research funding. But if you happen to have $50,000 lying around, send it my way. Yeah. So thanks for listening, and yeah, that's my thing.